welcome to all the participants today. This is our fourth webinar on J. Krishnamurthy's talks and thoughts compiled in a book called Total Freedom and facilitated by our own Sri Krishnapani K.C. Raju. So for all those who were not here earlier and have joined us today, I don't think there's anybody here that hasn't joined us, but anyway, the school is at, oh, you've joined us today? Arun? Okay, all right. Okay, so the School of Ancient Wisdom is a place for spiritual growth and personal transformation, and we are located at Devanahalli in Bangalore. Just a request to all of you that if you are enjoying these talks and you're benefiting from these talks, can we request you to circulate the webinar details to your friends for the next session, please? Because I think the whole idea of the school is to spread this message, and we would like to do that. So we will need the help of everybody that participates in our webinars to be able to do that. Also, please note that whether you get the message or not, this is a regular Saturday program at 11:30. So please tune in at 11:30 every Saturday. Even if you don't get, if you have failed to see the message or whatever, we are at the same ID. We have the same Zoom ID, and we will be here at 11:30 every Saturday. Just a few protocols that you will be muted through the talk. I would request all of you to stay muted until the host unmutes you or Krishnapani ji tells you to unmute yourself and ask the question. You have a chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please use that freely and ask whatever questions you would like to ask on the talk that we have today. And Krishnapani ji will take it in turn. So we can start now, and I don't think we need to introduce Krishnapani ji, but everybody knows him. So I think we'll go straight ahead with our school prayer. Thank you so much, Krishnapani ji, for taking time out and being with us every week. That is amazing. Thank you so much. Ram, can I request you to say the school prayer, please?
School prayer.
Yes.
O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light,
shining in
every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is also one with every other.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ram.
Mahesh can mute everybody.
Yes.
Else, so that there is no disturbance, background disturbance. Are you able to hear me? Thank you.
Yes, we can.
A very good morning to all the participants. Welcome to this program, a continuing program with different sessions on the talks of Jiddu Krishnamurthy. As was mentioned, this is from a book called The Total Freedom. And this is from the first part. This first part includes talks given in the years 1934 and 1935. And we find that Krishnaji, if somebody has been reading or listening to Krishnamurthy over several decades, you will find that there is an evolution in his vocabulary and idiom and the terms which he has used. But however, one consistent factor which you find is that there is absolutely no difference or no change in the core of his teachings. So that is the important aspect which we note, that he has been holding on to that core which he had announced in the year 1929. So, but we find that there is a kind of a freshness and some kind of naivete in his earlier talks. Subsequently, we find that there is a lot of maturity in a different manner, not exactly relating to the teachings, but where he has been able to meet thousands of people across the world, experts and laymen and people from all fields of, from all walks of life. And he could evolve his own, vocabulary and understanding. And a very important point which I want to make at the very beginning is that Krishnamurti has always talked about non-verbal experience, an experience which is not verbalized, but unfortunately, because words are only the means of communication available to us, he has tried to verbalize to the maximum extent possible and left it at that. And he has always been asking the listeners to inquire, to explore, and experience on their own, and not get caught in the words. So the verbalization which Krishnamurti does, we have to go beyond the words in several cases and then look at it from a deeper point of view. Now, this particular talk was given on June 30th, 1934 at Ojai in California. Now, the title of this talk is To Be True Human Being. And at the very beginning, J. Krishnamurti says, what we call happiness or ecstasy is to me creative thinking. And creative thinking is the infinite movement of thought, emotion, and action. We will just slightly go deeper into what he means when he has framed this sentence and said, and creative thinking is the infinite movement of thought, emotion, and action. The fundamental aspect he is trying to convey is that it is an integration of all the three modes of action in one way. That is thought, emotion, and action. These are to be integrated, and through that process of integration, there will be what he calls as creative thinking, especially when there is an infinite movement which is unrelated to the spatio-temporal framework within which the mind operates. Now, when we talk about action, it's not physical action alone. It is both mental and emotional action, and also verbal action, what we normally refer to as thought, word, and deed. But usually action includes word, includes our ability to articulate, along with the other organs of action like your hand and feet and things like that. And your sensory organs are anyway there. So the fundamental point to be noted is he is talking about an infinite movement which is integrated. Integrated in the sense, at the very beginning he says, whenever I say thought, it includes emotion and action. And whenever I say action, it also again includes thought and emotion. All these three are not to be dealt with separately, but in an integrated manner. And that movement, which is infinite, he calls it as creative thinking. And in that creative thinking is what he calls as happiness or ecstasy. Now, what is the fundamental difference between this integrated action or integrated movement, as he calls it, and the other thing with which we are much more familiar? We are much more familiar with our mental perception of things, which I have earlier explained relates to experience, knowledge, and memory. Obviously, all experience which is converted into some kind of knowledge and stored in memory can always be only in the past. There cannot be anything in the present as far as our mental activity is concerned, because it is an accumulation. It is an accumulation of experiences and that experience doesn't remain as experience. It gets converted into knowledge, some kind of classification happens, and we have this, my mind has this faculty of some kind of pigeonhole storage system. So it tries to store these experiences and knowledge in memory, and therefore it is always the past that is operating. But when there is an integrated movement, and that too what he calls as an infinite movement, that cannot be in the field of the mind as we understand, which is within the dimensions of space and time with which we are familiar with. So it is generally the mind is always interested onto holding on to something, is always interested in seeking, is always interested on results, always interested in achievement. It wants something, it is always looking for an outcome or a result, and it wants some kind of achievement or attainment of some state within the field of the mind only. So it is always looking at something what Krishnaji calls as, it wants some culmination to things, some ending to things, because the mind cannot live in isolation and it cannot also live with uncertainty. So in some form or the other, it tries to come to a conclusion. It tries to come to the attainment of some goal, some objective. And also it is looking for what he calls as, what is in it for me? It's always looking for, from this point of view only, that it wants something for itself. It's always looking for something which it says that, yeah, I want this. Now, this aspect has to be clearly distinguished from what he is calling as this infinite movement. It's something which is unbroken, which is unfragmented, which is complete and whole in itself. Whereas the mind is not used to that state of being. The mind is not actually, in a way, not capable. It's not capable of reaching some state. There is this unbroken and unfragmented movement, and an integrated movement at that. Integrated movement of thought, emotion, and action, as he says. So when these three are there, in the ordinary course of things, they appear to be separate. In the sense, we think something, we say something and do something. So there is a disconnection between these three. I may be thinking ill of somebody, but obviously I don't want to say that to his face or even behind him. And at the same time, my action could be totally different and unrelated to my thought process and my verbalization of it. So any disconnect between these three is always leading to dissipation of energy. This is a very fundamental aspect, because the mind cannot live or cannot comprehend what he calls as this infinite movement in an integrated manner. It is always in bits and pieces. There is cessation and commencement. There is a cessation and a movement. There is a disconnect amongst all the fragments that are there in the mind. So now, this gets directly reflected in our action. And again, just as a reminder, when he says action, it also means thought and emotion. What happens here is, it gets reflected in our conduct. It gets reflected in our work. It gets reflected in our behavior. It gets reflected in how we relate to people. Obviously, all action is the relationship between the individual and the society, as Krishnaji says. Any action is a relationship. This relationship is between the individual and the society. And the fallacy in this is that the individual and society are falsely seen to be two separate entities. Because we have seen in the earlier talks that the environment brings about what he calls as this individual. The individual, the I, is a product and a result of the environment. If you look at it from a very comprehensive point of view, we can make out there's not something very profound in one way. The lack of understanding is what is creating a barrier, but a little bit of understanding also tells me that what I identify as myself is a product of the environment and the interaction between the individual and the environment. See, I have resulted, my entire thought process, my emotions, my feelings, my desires, my actions are very intimately connected to the environment around me. So there is a continuous mutual interaction between the environment and the individual. The individual, for its own convenience, has separated itself from the society or the environment. And now he finds in a false situation of conflict. This false identity creates a conflict between this identity, which I call as I or me, and the environment. The environment includes everything other than me. It's not something specific or particular. Everything that is not me or I is the environment for me. So that's where the dichotomy comes. And in that dichotomy, whatever action is taken, it always results in conflict. And conflict results in suffering and sorrow. We are not happy. Essentially, we are not happy with the things. We are not happy with people. We are not happy with situations. Because of this conflict, because of this basic division between the I and the society. So this factor, unless we recognize it, then you see the whole thing falls into its own rightful place. As Krishnaji says, now if this movement of thought is clear, simple, direct, spontaneous, profound, then there is no conflict in the individual against society. For action then is the very expression of this living, the creative movement. When there is this integrated action, when there is this integration of thought, emotions, and actions, which is an infinite movement, then what happens? He has used about 4 or 5 terms. He said clear. There is clarity. There's a great amount of clarity. Then simplicity. Things, what appeared to be very complex become very simple. Then what appeared to be remote or indirect become direct. And what appeared to be thought out, what appeared to be taking time, now becomes spontaneous. That there is no gap between the understanding and the action that results out of it. And again, you will also see the element of what he calls as profundity. There's something very profound, something very deep, something which is the basis of the whole movement. So he has used these terms very precisely when he says clear, simple, direct, spontaneous, and profound. Now, instead of trying to think of them, we can look at ourselves, look at our own thoughts, look at our own being, and see if there is clarity in us, if there is simplicity in us. Because clarity and simplicity always go together. Once you have clarity, there are some participants who have not muted. May I request them to mute their speakers. Mr. Suresh,
Oh,
somebody
sorry.
has to mute. Okay? Please. Okay, thank you.
He's on mute.
So this clarity and simplicity, they always go together. Complexity comes about only when there is no clarity in any of the things. Unless you have this clarity, things will not become simple. And incidentally, I think most of the participants who have been coming to the School of Ancient Wisdom, I'm very fond of mentioning this, and they know, and some participants are here who may not know about it. There is an Indian term. There's a very beautiful Indian term called as prasada. When we say prasad, the first thing that comes to our mind is what is some very tasty thing that is given to us in the temples. But the etymological meaning of this word prasada means clarity. Now look at the connection. When a man is disturbed, or when a man has some conflict in him, when a man has sorrow, when a person is in a distressed condition and is uncertain about things and unable to resolve things on their own and by his own process, then normally we seek some refuge, and it generally happens to be a temple. Now, from an ancient Indian perspective, a temple great source of energy. Temple, it doesn't necessarily mean a Hindu temple only. Any temple for that matter is a center of energy. And when we go to that center of energy, we expect some amount of clarity to come about, some amount of resolution of our problems, some amount of dissipation of our distress and sorrow. And in the process, in the temple, normally what is offered is prasada. The etymological meaning, as I said, is clarity. So when you offer something to the deity in the temple, which is a very great center of energy, that energy gets into this offering. Whatever you have offered to that energy, that also gives us energy, and that energy provides us with clarity. And therefore, that is the meaning of prasada. So I've been humorously asking my participants that don't use the term prasada from now onwards. Whenever you go to a temple, you please ask the priest to give some clarity. So when you are asking, when you are clear in your mind that you have come to a temple and for asking for some clarity, because prasada has become a very loaded term for us. The moment we talk of prasada, it is some laddu or some very interesting dish and things like that. And we have this tradition of different types of dishes being offered to the deity on different days. So there are some people who go to the temple on certain days only because they are very sure that they will get what is of interest to them. So it is better now to think in terms of clarity and seek that clarity at a mental level so that things become simple for us. What is complex becomes simple for us. So clarity and simplicity are like two sides of this coin. So similarly, things become direct and spontaneous and profound, and I would not like to go much into it. We'll just proceed further. Now, Krishnamurti comes to another interesting dimension where he is talking about what he calls as if the mind is seeking a result or something it wants to gain, then the mind becomes complacent and stagnant. Then the mind becomes totally complacent because it has already predetermined. You're performing an action with a very specific objective or result or a gain in mind and approaching that. This is not true seeking. This is actually not true seeking because you have already predetermined what you want and you are trying various means to reach that end. So the means you adopt determine the end also. Like the mind is used to say, I want to go from here to, from point A to point B. Now I know my goal there. I know that point B is the place where I need to reach. Now you find the best way possible to go. But when it comes to psychological factors like trying to understand the nature of desire, the nature of suffering, the nature of sorrow, the nature of pleasure and pain. When you are trying to understand something which is deep and something which is profound, what happens here is if you predetermine that also, if you predetermine the goal in such cases also, you will be only trying to find escape routes or somehow or the other go around it. Because you don't want sorrow, you don't want suffering. You and I don't like what we see in us. If I see that I am an envious person, if I see that I am filled with jealousy, or if I am filled with anger, I don't like the me. I say this is not the true me. No, I need to create an ideal. So I should get rid of anger. Now, getting rid of anger is an escape route. The fact of the matter is that I am filled with anger. I am unable to live with that truth. I am unable to live with that truth in an integrated manner where I am able to perceive the reality of it through all my faculties of thought, emotion, and action. I am not fragmenting myself as I am separate and the anger in me is separate, which is again a false notion. I am not separate from that anger when I am actually angry. I am anger, and that anger operates through all my senses and all my my organs of the body. My blood pressure goes up, my temperature goes up, my facial features change, my eyes may become red, or I may be, terribly agitated. My whole body is moving. So I am actually a personification of anger at that moment. I am no way different from that anger. So whenever you talk in terms of trying to attain something, trying to reach something, trying to gain something out of it, you are falling into this trap where you are predetermining the end and you are adopting a suitable means to reach the end which you already have decided in your mind. So therefore, that is the reason why Krishnaji always used to say that practice is always a case of conflict. I am this, I want to practice I am violent, I want to practice non-violence. The moment you think in these terms and think in terms of effort or practice, you are creating a duality. You are not this, or you are not what you want, and you want to become something which you have placed in front of you as an ideal. Therefore, you are missing the whole beauty of it because you are not living in the moment and able to see the reality. The reality is that I am violent. The reality is something which we are unable to face because we do not have that infinite movement of integrated movement of thought, emotions, and action. So therefore, he says, practice, if you come to observe it, ponder over it, is nothing but the result of duality. When you see the futility of continual accumulation, you begin to be aware of how your mind is functioning. When you see the futility of continual accumulation, in fact, all these factors which we have talked about, where we have created this duality and these opposites, hatred and love, what we have said as just now as in the process of practicing violence and non-violence, you have created several dualities. So this is a form of accumulation. The mind is still in the accumulation mode. It wants to gain what it calls as an ideal of non-violence. That means I don't have it. I don't have that quality of non-violence in me, and I want to accumulate that as a quality or gather that as a quality. I am basically filled with hatred. I want to accumulate love. I am in a situation where my normal nature is filled with anger, and I start thinking that I should not be angry, I should be calm and peaceful. So you see, I am rejecting something which is in me and accumulating something which is not in me. And this I give the name of practice. So when you are continuously in this mode of practice, this duality will continue and conflict arising out of the duality will continue always. So what is the important thing is to be aware of the mind and its functioning. We should be very acutely aware of what and how the mind is functioning, how the mind is actually operating. That is more important than any ideal, than any knowledge, than any accumulation, than any of these things. The observation, the awareness, the perception of the reality of how my mind is functioning. And therefore, in a different context, he makes a very beautiful thing. You have to observe very carefully the stimulus and the response. Generally for us, if you see most of the cases, 99.9999% of our life, the response to stimulus is almost instantaneous. Why is it so? Why is this response to any stimulus immediate and instantaneous? Because we are used to it and we have already accumulated sufficient knowledge and memory about it, about things. And therefore, we are simply responding from that memory. I don't give a gap. And this memory is not individual also. Krishnamurti says we have this racial accumulation. This accumulation in the human psyche, the whole human psyche, for thousands and thousands of years. I have all that experience. Now scientists call that as the limbic brain or the reptilian brain, and they talk about all these things. This is actually a question of accumulated knowledge, accumulated thing where it has always been a self-protective mechanism has been developed. So the self-protective mechanism instantaneously jumps into the picture whenever there is a stimulus and responds to it. Now here, Krishnamurti says, if you can create a gap between the stimulus and the response, and not allow your past memory, your experience or knowledge to instantaneously respond to the situation, you will find something very beautiful happening in this gap. if somebody is shouting at you, somebody is abusing you, immediately shout back, to immediately respond, or if I'm strong enough, I'll punch his nose also, because I don't like the way he is abusing me. And that instantaneous response is only going to aggravate the situation and going to create more and more conflict, isn't it? It's a very simple fact. One need not deeply ponder over it. We know in our daily life that most of the time our response is instantaneous. But if you can create that gap between the stimulus and the response, something new can happen. Something totally new can happen. That situation, that gap which you have created, is the observation, is the perception or the awareness without response. You are not now responding from the past, from the accumulation of your experience, knowledge, and memory. So you suddenly see something new. That he calls as this infinite movement of all the three integrated approach, integrated response of thought, emotions, and action. And this is something which cannot be actually practiced. This is something which we cannot practice. In that gap between the stimulus and the response, if you see, you can see the significance of the entire past. You can see the significance of the entire past. It's of no value now. The past has lost its significance because you have halted the response. And unfortunately, what we do is we don't do that. And we think, okay, next time onwards, I shouldn't be angry. Next time onwards, if somebody abuses me, I should not abuse him directly. Or the mind may very cunningly decide, okay, this fellow is abused, no? Let me find out a better way of hitting him back. Not necessarily through abuse, but in some other form where it really hurts him. You know, the mind in a very cunning way can devise. So I'm not talking about such a gap. I'm not talking about such a gap which we see in the villains and politicians in movies. If somebody is abusing, they simply smile at him or laugh and dismiss him. But there is something else going on in their mind. It's not a, you see, laughter is also a response from the past. When there is a stimulus, your response, if the stimulus is abuse, it need not necessarily be abuse. You might have trained your body and your mind and your whole process of thinking not to respond as abuse, but in some other form also. You have to be very careful because the mind is very subtle. The mind is very, very subtle. So it can play any kind of mischief. It can play any kind of game with you. So I have to be very careful that when I say a gap between the stimulus and the response, there is absolutely no response at all whatsoever. Absolutely no response, where there is no role for the mind to play, because the mind brings in its storehouse of experiences, knowledge, and memory. That is what it is. That is what is the nature of the mind, and the whole process is interrupted by it. So when you don't allow that to happen, there is an integrated movement. Any kind of practice or self-discipline, Krishnaji says, is only merely an adjustment to environment. If you're talking about self-discipline, as we normally understand, because the word discipline is not, it has a different meaning altogether when Krishnaji uses it. But when he's talking about self-discipline, we think in terms of practice. We think in terms of, I should discipline myself, I should have a regular regimen, I should have a very systematic way of dealing with things, and all kinds of things. That is nothing but an adjustment to the environment. You don't like certain things, so you adjust to it through discipline. So this is the problem. So that is where Krishnaji has always rejected effort, practice, self-discipline, and all these things which are the games the mind can play with us. What becomes much more important is the very observation of things. The very observation of that is what brings in this change. Because now there is this separation between the stimulus and the response by a gap, which is a way of understanding the nature of the stimulus. What is the nature of the stimulus? As it is usually said, 99% of our life is only reaction. There is no original action as such. There is no original action. We are always thinking in terms of reaction. Because it is used to it. The mind, the whole process, the whole system is used to it. Therefore, this is a problem. Now, an interesting question is raised by one of the participants in this particular talk. And he says about our mind has another tendency of waiting for something to become more and more strong in order to feel the stimulus also. Over a period of time, we get used to several stimuli, different kinds of stimuli, we get used to it. Now, the mind has become complacent and stagnant. That is the reason why he has used these terms of complacent and stagnant. Now, what do? Suppose I have some sorrow. There's a little amount of sorrow, not very happy with things. I'm carrying some grouse. I'm carrying some, sense of inadequacy or insufficiency, or some kind of distress. I'm unable to achieve something, or whatever be the motive. There is some kind of a disturbance in me, some kind of, what I would, let us say, call it as suffering or sorrow, or pain for that matter. Now we allow that to come to a threshold point. Unless the pain suddenly becomes acute, we don't even want to respond. There's another way of looking at it. When an experience gives you pain and at the same time gives you pleasure, you do nothing. Like most of our relationships are like that. Pardon me, but if you examine, if we can examine our relationships, they always carry some element of pain and some element of pleasure. Like a relationship between wife and husband, like a relationship between boss and subordinate. There's always this combination of pleasure and pain. As long as we are in this combination, we don't want to disturb it, we don't want to do anything because we got used to it. Every day my wife nags me, or my husband scolds me, or my boss shouts at me, maybe sometime in the morning and sometime in the afternoon, immediately after coming to office and before leaving to the office. You get adjusted because you have the pleasure of holding a job. So you are willing to suffer the pain. So absolutely, the mind now has got used to things. It's not doing anything. Now, what precisely happens is, it won't remain that way. Either the pain or the pleasure goes on increasing. If the pleasure goes on increasing, your greed to have more and more comes into it. At some point, it will lead to frustration and anger and so on and so forth. If it is pain, it immediately you need to respond to it because the pain has become something beyond the threshold, beyond your ability to manage it. Therefore, this mind is used to waiting for build up, waiting for the whole thing to build up to a crisis, which is again a foolish way of responding to things. So instead of waiting for this pain or this suffering or sorrow or whatever you call it as frustration or greed or anger to come to a threshold, it may be important for you to become sensitive. If you become more and more sensitive, the threshold will come down and you are able to recognize the nature of this pain and this pleasure. And mind you, in June 1934, Krishnaji makes a very profound statement in this particular talk, and I'll just read to you. He says, by the look of things, political, war may break out again. It may break out in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. An intelligent man can see this and intelligently act. But the man who is stagnating, who is waiting for pain to force him to action, looks to greater chaos, greater suffering to give him impetus to act, and hence his intelligence is not functioning. Look at the profundity of this statement. 1934, he said that an intelligent man can sense that in the next 2 years or 5 years, a war is going to come. And it actually happened in 1939. And what did a country like US do? It did not participate initially. Till the pain became so much that it was directly affected. Then only it jumped into the fray and acted. That is the way of an unintelligent man, he says. See, waiting for pain to force him to action looks to greater chaos. Like most of us do that. Most of us do that. My family is not disturbed. My community or my gated community is not disturbed. My mohalla or my street or my main road or the area where I look at it or what now is being called in this pandemic as a zone. So my zone has not been seriously affected. So I can be callous. I can be lazy. I can be, give a go-by to all precautionary measures. What is it that we are doing? We are actually waiting for our zone, which may be in the green zone now, to become amber and then red, and then only respond to that. This is a very unintelligent way of doing it. This is a very, very, very unintelligent way of doing it. The intelligent way, as he says, is you have to be sensitive to the suffering. You have to be sensitive to the entire process of suffering, and that can happen only through the continual experiences which you are having in the world. And that is in one way what we are calling it as ignorance. That's an ignorance. And obviously, you have to face the consequences of ignorance. You may wish away the reality of things, but you cannot wish away the reality, the consequences of that reality. You may ignore reality, but can you ignore the consequences of that reality? Because that consequences will be directly affecting you and me. That consequences will be directly causing us pain and suffering. So this is the aspect where one has to become terribly aware and sensitive to things. Once you become sensitive, then, as the title of the talk says, you become a true human being. One is a true human being because he is acting with that intelligence, with that sensitivity, and with that integrated approach which integrates the thought, the emotions, and action, and it flows from that. So any action flowing from that intelligence cannot be anything but the right action. It is always the right action. So it is important, he says, when you are looking at a global problem, you can't have a national perspective to things. National perspective, in certain respects, may be okay. But now we see that things have become global. So there is a necessity for sharing. There is a necessity for caring. There is a necessity to look at humanity as one. In a way, that is one of the takeaways from this pandemic which we are seeing. If we are sensitive enough, we become a true human being where we are able to see this connection, where we are able to intimately connect ourselves and all aspects of human endeavor. That's what, therefore, he says, you are able to see the intimate connection between all these things, like between politics, religion, economics, social life. All these are now integrated, isn't it? Our political ideologies, our religious thought, our social, ideologies, our economic ideologies, all of them, these things cannot be looked at in isolation now. They can be only looked at as an integral thing because our politics is affecting the economy, our politics is affecting the society, our religion is affecting the politics, and religion is affecting the society. So there is this compound effect which is happening, which is actually going through. We are actually going through that phase, and it should make us more and more sensitive. Otherwise, what happens is any imposition of practice or self-discipline becomes a compulsion. Why most of us cannot do things which we want to do? Because somewhere the body and the mind are in conflict. Like, for example, I want to do yoga. I can't do it. Even if I do it, I'll do it for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Then the body starts resisting. Because the body feels that this is a compulsion. This is something which is being enforced upon it. But if you're looking at it from the point of view of intelligence, that intelligence dictates you that you need to lead a healthy life. And a healthy life obviously means a healthy diet, a healthy exercise, a healthy sleeping habit, and all the other factors are included in that. So that is what is important for us to understand from a deeper perspective. And that is where he says, in response to a question as to how is it possible to awaken thought in an organism, then Krishnamurti says, by the simple process of suffering, which we are anyway undergoing. We need not invite suffering separately. We are anyway in suffering, anyway in sorrow, anyway in distress. Somehow or the other, we are disturbed. We're not happy with the status quo. We're not happy with the things as they are. So unless you are awakened to that suffering, and awakened to that sorrow, awakened to that continual experience of the mind, which is accumulating, instead of experiencing, it is accumulating. And this accumulating, at some point or the other, will always cause suffering, will always cause disappointment, will always cause frustration, will always cause distress, will always cause tremendous amount of stress and tension, because you have never given thought to understanding it in an integrated manner. If you are able to look at every relationship with that integrated approach, with that integrated sense of perception, you will see something totally new happening. See, he is not ruling out the factor that sometimes when we become aware, the conflict appears to be bigger. He's not saying that the conflict will simply vanish away the first time you look at it. When you actually focus when you become attentive, the conflict appears to be much more real. What you have been avoiding for a long time, when you face it, when you actually face it, that conflict becomes much more real and much more intense. In fact, sometimes what is hidden in our subconscious mind, in the unconscious layers of our mind, They're all one actually, but sometimes we have pushed down certain things down into the unconscious, some into the subconscious, and some we have retained in the conscious. So when we become conscious of the superfluous, slowly the subconscious and the unconscious also comes to the surface, and you are able to see in an integrated manner, in a holistic manner, the whole process of this conflict. And he says, this alertness itself produces a disturbance, and when there is that crisis, that intensity of conflict, when the mind is not escaping, then it begins to think anew, to think creatively, and that very thinking, he calls it as eternity. That very process, that very thinking, he calls it as eternity, and that is where we need to bring about that alertness. Become alert to the conflict, become alert to the disturbance, become alert to the suffering, become totally and intensely aware of it. And through that intensity, where there is no escaping, where there is no search for solutions or search for somehow or the other means to end it, because as I said, if you decide the end, you will also decide the means. So when you are intensely aware of it, when you are intensely looking at it, in that attentiveness, in that attention and in that observation, something new will begin, and that is creativity, and that is the living in the eternity. And only when we are able to do that, one can truly say that one is a true human being. Thank you so much. I have some questions from one Mr. Kalyan Ganguly. Is this phenomenon of stimulus and response behind tribalism, us and them? Obviously, very true. See, what happens is, this is something which we have accumulated over a long period of time. It's not, it is in our racial memory. Right from our, origins as a hunter-gatherer, as a, forager, as something, somewhere, no, it is actually said that as a hunter-gatherer or as a forager, your senses are very, very alert actually, because you are constantly threatened by danger. Danger could be in any form. Danger could be an animal. Danger could be a snake. Danger could be a poisonous fruit or a poisonous mushroom. You've been used to eating certain things, and you come across something new and you eat it and you may die. So you see, over a period of time, you become highly self-protective. And this self-protection mechanism, which is individual, becomes what I would call as a group mentality. Slowly, I find comfort in the group, and my tribe, my community, and that tribe again collectively becomes self-protective, and we expand this. Expand this a lot, and then we create larger communities, much bigger, larger communities. The very idea of nationalism, Krishnamurti used to say, is from this tribal memory. The tribalistic thing, we have expanded it to a nation. So it is very much true that this stimulus response thing, which has become automatic for us, creates this tribalism, and it also goes to the extent of creating nationalism. He was never, he never talked about, he was never in favor of talking in terms of nations, because this is a bigger tribe. And incidentally, that was the period when the American government imposed a restriction on him, and he was not allowed to go out of US for 5 years when the Second World War was going on. Okay, then we come to the second question by Mrs. Beena Mirchandani. We feel a lack when we don't have enough knowledge, for instance. This is accumulation. So how can we think creatively? is the accumulation in any sense worth anything to me? If ever human being thinks creatively, negating his past and his conditioning, then what is the purpose of experience that we should learn from? Is past experience redundant? No, see, there are two factors. Krishnaji himself used to divide this process as the technical mind and the psychological mind. Not that they are two different minds, they are two different aspects of the mind. One aspect is the technical aspect of it. Why do we call it as technical? Because we, right from our childhood, we learn a certain mode of behavior, a certain mode of living in a society. Like when you train a child, what do you call as a potty training? That's also a technical training. When a person learns how to fly a Boeing 787 or Airbus 380, that's also a technical aspect. Accumulation there, the accumulation is necessary. There you are accumulating a skill, accumulating a system of performing things which are useful in this world. You accumulate a particular skill of driving, or he would go to the extent of saying that coming to Krishnaji's talks, you can't suddenly, forget your address, because from the meeting you have to go back home. So that memory is required. You need to know the route back to your house. You need to know how to commute. If you have come by car, you can't simply forget about the car and start walking away from there. No. See, this technical aspect of the mind is very, very important. And that is what is responsible for all the scientific and technological development, isn't it? We don't go on reinventing the wheel. We don't go on reinventing the same things which have been done earlier. We progress that way from a scientific and technological point of view. But when it comes to psychological accumulation, like when you are hurt, when somebody hurts you, that's a psychological accumulation. Now you need to go deep into it and see what is it that is hurt. Obviously, what is hurt is the image I have created about myself. Now, if I have foolishly created an image in myself and think that I have lot of understanding of Krishnamurti, which itself is a foolishness, and somebody from the participants may come and say, you are idiotic, you don't even understand anything about Krishnamurti. The moment he says that, I am hurt. Because I thought that I have understood a lot. I have created an image in myself that I have read Krishnamurti, I have heard Krishnamurti, I have discussed about Krishnamurti, I have participated in so many programs on Krishnamurti. How can somebody say that I am a fool? So what is hurt is the image. This self-image is an accumulation, is a psychological accumulation. This psychological accumulation is what is causing the hurt. That means somebody has thrown a stone in the form of an abuse at this image, which I have very carefully and very delicately nurtured over the past 50, 60, 70 years. And somebody has shattered it now. So this psychological experience, Krishnaji says, is something which you need not accumulate. Because why is it that you are accumulating? Because you have created a center called as the I. If there were to be no center, which I call as I, there is no question of getting hurt in the process. So when you are talking about accumulation, you have to see it in two parts. One accumulation is the technical accumulation, which is essential for living on this earth. The other form of accumulation is accumulation of an image. I not only form an image about myself, I also form an image about my wife. I also form an image about you. I also form an image about somebody. So there is no true relationship because my image is responding to your image and your image is responding to my image. So there is no, my true self is in no way responding to your true self. So this dichotomy is there and this conflict cannot be resolved unless there is this process of accumulation completely eliminated. there is no recording mechanism now. Nothing is, you don't come into the picture at all now. There is no I. So that is what is the redundant. To that extent, that is redundant because that's a burden you are carrying. And this process is infinitely going on. It's going on and on and on and on. Going on accumulating about yourself and about others. And every time you meet a new person, you accumulate more about, every time you go through an experience, you accumulate more of this hurt, more of this image, So there are only two things. In another forum on J. Krishnamurti, I was telling them that the observation should reveal to you whether this process of accumulation is strengthening this sense of I or shattering the sense of I. All your observation, if you look at it, is it strengthening or is it shattering? If it is strengthening, you will continue to be in conflict. If it is shattering that image, then maybe you are in the right direction, maybe you are moving in the right direction where there is no accumulation. Then such an accumulation, which always becomes a burden, has to be put aside. You have to completely eliminate it. It's not that you lose the self, but the self is no longer an accumulated image. It's no longer an accumulated image. It is the true self. So that cannot accumulate at all. The very process of that is it cannot accumulate. And out of that, therefore, Krishnaji says, whether you call it as love or compassion or intelligence, or even if you may call it as God or whatever it is, any other symbol is also okay. Whatever it is, that is the source of it. So that's you have to make a very subtle difference between what is required as an accumulation and what is absolutely not required. Then there is Miss Sunita. What if I am not doer but be receiver of a negative action? Should I have same reaction and observe the gap between the stimulus and response before I respond, or just accept any suffering it causes? Now, this acceptance is also a game the mind plays. See, I very clearly mentioned, when you give a gap between stimulus and response, there should not be any action of the mind. There should not be any response at all whatsoever, because any response comes from the past. And acceptance is also a past response. Don't accept it, don't reject it, don't condemn it, don't justify it, don't do anything. Absolutely. As though you are looking at it for the first time. So you see, you have classified it as negative action because it is hurting you. The stimulus, you are classifying it as negative action because it is hurting you. And what is this you? This you is an image I have formed about myself. And I have also formed an image about the person abusing me. So one image is responding to another. Stimulus from one image, there is a response from another image only. But when you create this gap, there is no question of accepting, there is no question of suffering, there is absolutely no question of classifying it as negative or positive also. You have to be very careful. Otherwise, as I said, the mind can infinitely deceive itself. The mind can go on continuously and infinitely deceive itself. That's what happens. Otherwise, you are stuck in it. You are stuck in it. You are stuck in that mind, and it will continue to be in that state only. So please don't think in terms of why I am responding to your question, Sunita ji, is you have used the term negative action. You have used the term acceptance of suffering. Both these things are based on your past experience. These are responses coming from the past, which is a repository of hurt, which is a repository of your own image. And this image has unfortunately been dented by too many people in too many places. Suppose you have a toughened glass. We are all like toughened glass. This toughened glass is this, it won't break. But it will, if you throw a stone at it, it will create it will do some damage. It will not break the image totally. So if 1,000 people have thrown stones at me, I'll have 1,000 dents on the toughened glass, which I call as myself. Now, if there is no glass at all, if there is no image at all, then where is the question of being dented? Where is the question of a scar? Where is the question of anything remaining on it? The glass is totally shattered now. The glass is totally shattered. And what happens? You need not, there's no question of responding from that at all. Any response that comes from that will be from the source of that intelligence, and that is acting and you are not acting. So you please examine this very carefully. Why do I classify something as negative? Now compare it with somebody who may be praising you, who may be flattering you, who may be giving pleasure to you. Will you reject it? You don't reject. If something pleasurable is happening to me, I want more and more and more and more of it. That's also an accumulation. No, why can't you look at both of them with the same clarity? Why can't you look at them with the same clarity that always pleasure is accompanied by pain in some form or the other? That flattering and hurting are not two different things, but their source is one and the same. One is trying to strengthen the eye, the image, and another is trying to dent that image. In either case, it's no different. Okay? Then can infinite movement also be called freedom and unconditioned? Binaji, as I said in the beginning, Krishnamurti has already done enough of verbalization. Enough of verbalization. He had gone almost to the limit of it and left it at that. Unfortunately, because the mode of communication is only through words, if you are adding two more words called as freedom and unconditioned, it is only again the mind that is responding to my statement or Krishnamurti's statement of infinite movement. Hope you understand and don't feel bad about it. You are again falling into the trap. You are again falling into the trap to understand this infinite movement from a mental perspective, from the perspective of your accumulated knowledge and memory only. You and I, at least I, cannot talk about that experience of that infinite movement at all unless I have been in that state, in which case also verbalization is only going to lead to nullifying the whole process. It will nullify the whole process. I hope you understand. Yeah, yeah. You said I got it. Yeah, please don't verbalize it and make. Don't add 3 or 4 other words to this infinite movement. Rather than holding it in our consciousness, what Krishnaji means by infinite movement, and what he means by an integrated approach where all the three, the thought, emotion, and action, are one and not in conflict, then we'll be able to have some glimpse of that beauty, that truth. Yeah. Any more questions? More questions are welcome, please. Don't feel bad about it. We are going to discuss it.
Krishna Paniji, there are 2 hands up there.
Oh, yeah, please. Okay.
Has a hand up, so I don't know whether he wants to ask a question.
Where is that? In the one minute, let me check up.
Go to participants.
Okay. Sushma Chandok. Yes, madam. Somebody has raised a hand there. Yeah. Okay. I think she is unmuted also. She can respond. She can ask whatever question.
Sushma ji?
Sushma ji is available.
She is not connected to her audio equipment.
I'm not sure.
Her audio is. And somebody else, I see Arun Malhotra ji.
Yeah.
Arun Malhotra ji, you can unmute yourself, sir. Yes, sir, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Okay. Somewhere in the beginning,
No.
you said that we go to the temple to seek refuge,
Yes.
right? I was only looking at the meaning of this particular sentence. Do we only go to the temple to seek refuge in case of a problem?
Not necessarily. A resolution of problem can also take you there. Like
it could be otherwise also as just a thanksgiving to a divinity.
That's what I'm saying. This thanksgiving for what?
For the life, for a peaceful life that you're leading. That's it.
So you are seeking peace.
Well, obviously.
So that examine that also. Please examine that also. Why is it that I am seeking peace? And
that's a universal acceptance of satisfaction.
Sir, let us not generalize it. Let us not generalize it. Let us look at it. The universal truth is that millions are suffering. But do we seek suffering?
The universal truth is that we want happiness.
So my question is, please examine, why do you want happiness? Have you examined that question? Why is it that I want happiness? And what is exactly happiness? Is living a comfortable life happiness? Is seeing that my daughter and my children are well settled happiness? Is it that I have a... Yeah?
To be away from suffering.
So there is suffering in us. Otherwise, you will not think of being away from it, no? So is happiness more true or suffering more true? Which is greater?
Happiness.
Where? Then why are you saying that happiness is keeping yourself away from suffering?
See, happiness and suffering, or happiness and unhappiness, are two extremes. You prefer the side of happiness. That's it.
Right.
Simple. You want to be away from discomfort.
No, sir. No. See, please understand this. You see, we are taking this as in duality. We are always in this duality. We are always in this duality of happiness and unhappiness, pleasure and pain. We are always, do we see this duality? This duality, as long as this duality is there cannot be anything called as absolute happiness. See, there is a third dimension to this. The third dimension says there is goodness, which has no opposite of it, calling as badness. So you are, as long as you are in duality, whether you are seeking happiness or unhappiness, it's only a matter of qualitative differentiation. See, that is the reason why we need to go into it very deeply. See, will I be happy if something happens to my wife or my child or my grandchild or somebody? No, isn't it? Is it not happening to somebody in this world constantly, somewhere or the other? Right? Now, fear could be an element associated with my happiness. My happiness is not undiluted and pure. My happiness always, there is a shade of fear. I go on praying to God that please maintain the status quo. I don't want anything bad to happen to somebody. So there is a fear in me. There is a fear in me that this happiness may be snatched away from me. There is a fear in me which says, always thinks in terms of not being disturbed. But the reality is, daily life, somewhere or the other, we are disturbed. Somewhere or the other, the status quo will not remain the same. If somebody or the other is hurt, somebody or the other has got this problem, right? So it is always in duality. Only when there is an integrated movement, which he calls an infinite movement, you will see a different dimension to the whole thing. Otherwise, you are stuck in duality. And the very definition of what we call as happiness has to be questioned. The very definition, for example, for you and me, a 1 crore bonanza may give great happiness. But if something like that happens to Mukesh Ambani, he says, okay, yaar, wo chiller baaju rakho, wo change aaya na ghar pe, baaju rakho usko. For him, it is absolutely of no consequence. So the spectrum is from one end to the other end. From one end where 1 rupee matters a lot to somebody, and somebody for whom $1 million doesn't matter. So this whole spectrum has to be examined. The whole spectrum of suffering has to be examined. The whole spectrum of happiness has to be examined. So we are talking about it at a much deeper level.
I suppose the one word at a deeper level for happiness would be contentment. Contented with what you have.
Sir, is that contentment permanent? Can it not be disturbed by external circumstances?
Yes.
Then?
That's what.
Then what? No. Then what is contentment becomes a discontentment the next moment. So what kind of contentment are you talking about? A contentment where there is no discontentment at all, isn't it? A happiness where there is absolutely no suffering at all. Now, who is it that is asking? It is this image which I have created about myself which is asking this question. And I have to question the questioner now. I have to go to the questioner. Who is this fellow who is doing this mischief, who is questioning this? You have to go deeper and deeper and deeper to know who is the questioner, who is this I, what is the nature of this I. When you go to that, you will go to the source of it and you will realize that the I itself is the problem. The I, which is a center, that itself is the problem. That center is creating this problem. Because that center is tied. The center is limited. The center is fragmented. The center is partial. The center will always be in conflict only. So, when you understand that, something new can happen. When you really understand the very nature of conflict, with the very nature of this I, a new dimension will come, which could perhaps give you an insight into what you and I may be calling as a true happiness. Okay? Yes, sir. Miss Sushma Chandok is she back? Is she in a position to ask a question now? Or then
I think Dr. Sana has a question.
Yeah, Dr. Sana has a question. Dr. Sana, please unmute and.
Yeah, can I come in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Namaste.
Namaste, sir.
Krishna ji. I would rather call you Krishna ji from now onwards.
Not necessary.
You
sir.
are going to be our immediate Krishna ji. You call JK as Krishna ji, and you are our immediate Krishna ji. Okay. Now coming to this prasadam. The very talk of yours is prasadam.
Thank you.
In terms of a mind, in terms of clarity. Okay.
So if I have been able to provide some clarity, that is the prasadam.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. See, very often we go to temple, rather, no, I go to a mosque. I go to temple on Thursday. There is a prasadam on Sai Baba temple.
Correct.
When I go for a prasadam, I am asking for a small thing, some sweetie, sing something. But as per your narration, now I have come to know the very purpose of visit is for seeking clarity,
Right.
getting out of the confusion. Okay.
Right.
See, in Mass, you must have seen there is no tradition of prasadam, but on one particular day of the year, that is on 26th night, that falls on 21st of May. That is called Shabbe Khadar.
Yeah.
It's a day of obedience.
Mm.
That day they give prasadam.
Okay.
Now I have now come to understand the significance of that prasadam, some sweet bundi they give. That is a kind of a clarity we are getting that night through the Descendants of Ram, which is a book of living, guidance of living. It's a wonderful understanding. Today, this talk, the takeaway for me is everywhere we go, we have to look for prasadam.
Clarity.
Not a physical, but it's a clarity when we interact. Okay, now coming to this stimulus and response, after listening to you, you will have to give me some more prasadam on this particular aspect. Say after stimulus, in order to have an integrated approach of thought and
Emotions and action.
emotions and action, I think it calls for whatever actions you do, it is all colored by your previous past. Okay. So I feel now the conclusion I'm drawing, you will have to clarify me, is immediate inaction, just wait and go for a self-correction.
No, don't even go for self-correction.
Yeah,
No.
stimulus could be taken as a mirror.
Yes.
And resort to self-correction. On this, you can throw some more light.
No, the only point is don't even look for self-correction. The very perception through that gap where the mind is not interfering in the entire process and you are not responding at all, you're not responding at all. That gives birth to a new perception. You may understand the person why he is abusing. I don't know if we have another 5 minutes of time. See, do we have Binaji?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I see. This is where the question of empathy. This is where the question of universal love and compassion also come about. I'll just take 2 to 3 minutes to narrate a beautiful story. See, I have narrated this, I think, in the School of Ancient Wisdom earlier also. This is for the participants who are here. See, normally in every village there is a village fool. Village fool in the sense he is not good at studies, he is not good at doing anything, he is not, he simply keeps roaming around. We normally call him as a village fool and nobody really bothers also. Because he is somebody's child and the village as a whole takes care of him and nobody takes him seriously also. So one fine day, on a sunny day, he was relaxing in a garden and suddenly was looking at the sky and found that the sky has no support at all. He is not able to see any pillars or poles supporting the sky. He is panicked. He says, this damn thing is going to fall on my head. And he starts running and whoever comes in between, he keeps telling them also, please run, the sky is going to fall. And nobody bothers. No, he's a fool. So everybody knows what he is in this village and nobody bothers about him. So he keeps running into the forest and ultimately he finds a great Swamiji sitting there under the tree meditating. He goes and wakes him up also. What Swamiji, what meditation you are doing? The sky is about to fall. Why don't you run along with me? Then the Swamiji holds him and says, don't worry, don't bother, the sky is not going to fall. There are pillars supporting the sky. I said, so then why don't you show me? He says, I will show you, but there is a precondition. The precondition, he says, is you go to every house in the village, start abusing the householders, and when somebody comes, ask him to give food. And then you bring that food to me, then I will show you the pillars. That is the importance of being a fool. See the importance of being a fool, because this fellow very sincerely took the advice of the sage, goes to every household and starts abusing them. Instead of giving him food, they keep on thrashing him. But he is single-tracked, single mind. That is important for us also. Single-track fellow. His intention is, unless he takes food to the Swamiji, he will not show me the pillars. So from morning till evening, he goes to every house in the village, and then he is getting beaten up every time, but he is not leaving his resolve. Ultimately, he is all bloodied, and all his dress is torn, and he is in a very bad shape. And finally, he goes to a house where he does the same thing again. He keeps abusing. An old lady walks out and says, "My dear child, I'm so sorry. Please don't abuse me. I have been slightly delayed in giving you for food. You please take this food. I see that you are in a bad condition. I'm sorry. You take this food." Now this fellow is surprised. But his intention is to take this food to the Swamiji sitting in the forest. He rushes there and tells him the entire story, saying this: there was, in the whole of this village, there was one lady who gave me this food, and also she was very kind to me, very loving, and she gave me the food. Then the Swamiji says, that lady is a pillar which upholds the sky. That lady is the one pillar which upholds the sky. Why? Because she was an embodiment of love and compassion, and she could empathize. The abuse of that person did not hurt her. The abuse of the person, of this fool, did not in any way shatter or dent her image. She could understand the distress, she could understand the concern, and she could respond from a different dimension. So you see, the beauty of this is, once you are in that state, that intelligence will operate. And that love, that compassion, that empathy, all these things flow from there. So what was her response to the stimulus of abuse? This response was compassion. This response was empathy. This response was love. So that is the transformation that occurs in that gap when you observe somebody actually abusing you, when you are not allowing that past to intervene, past to interfere in this process. So that's what he is talking about. He is talking about a totally different state to which we are not accustomed at all. So you see the problem now. The gap is not a simple gap. It's not like a psychologist saying that whenever you get angry, count 1 to 100. That's a foolish way. This anger will convert into hatred. This hatred will convert into revenge. This revenge will convert into something stronger. It's not that counting from 1 to 100 and 1 to 200 or 500, that doesn't matter at all. Don't use that gap from the psychologist or the psychiatrist's point of view. That gap has to be a totally empty, totally vacant gap where the mind does not interfere in any way, and therefore it is not responding to the stimulus at all. When the mind is not responding to the stimulus, some other entity will respond to it, and that response is from that source of intelligence, is from that source of love and compassion. That's how it comes into. Okay.
So wonderful. Thank you.
So you have to bring in that. And one more thing, when you were saying that in mosques or some holy places of Muslims do not have this prasad, they have a prasad in a different form. One of the prasads is that you become acutely aware of your sins and you ask for forgiveness.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So you are seeking that clarity of forgiveness, and you are also getting the clarity that you have sinned.
Yeah, that's true. Very
so
much.
The fact that you go to that place and become aware of yourself and aware of your sins is the prasadam.
Yes.
You
It's very
understand
much
the point?
true. Yeah, very much true. That's why,
Yeah.
Dukkha is said to be Mahaprasada, while happiness is said to be only Prasadam. Greater clarity out of Dukkha. It's a wonderful reinforcement. Thank you.
You'll
Thank
get a
you.
great- Yeah. Any more questions, or we are almost
I think
8 minutes past our normal time?
Yeah.
If there are no other questions,
Yeah.
I
we
think
can close.
that lady has left.
Yeah,
She appears to be there, but she appears to be on also, but I think forgotten.
Yeah. Maybe
Anyway, we
yeah.
will see if she
All
can post. If there are no more questions, we can wind up this session.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Krishnapani ji, for
Thank
that
you so
last story and for the the clarity on stimulus and response that you gave us at the end. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. That's for the benefit of everybody. We will be here next week again, and the topic that we're going to be doing next week is being vulnerable to truth.
Yes.
That's the topic we'll take up next week at the same time. So see you all there. We will close with our usual prayer. Can I ask Suman to please chant it for us? Suman, are you here? Suman, please unmute yourself. Yes.
Yes, Suman Goenka ji is there. Yes, madam.
Can you please close for us? Thank you.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामया सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः.
Thank you so much, Suman. On that note, we'll close. Please, the next time I will be sending you the information for next week's talks. If you've benefited with these talks, please spread the word. Thank you so much, and see you next week at 11:30. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarji.